This session, 10 things not to do in a large-scale deployment. A lot of really interesting things. I know many of you who are members of the Jamf Nation community will recognize Steve, either just for being a huge member of the community and a big contributor and doing a lot of things, but please come with me in welcoming Steve to talk through large-scale deployments.
Thanks, sir. Thank you. Well, good afternoon. Hopefully I won't induce that food coma too much with this session. So as John said, I'm Steve Wood. I'm with the Omnicom Group. We are an advertising holding company. We're one of the top 3 in the world. What does that mean? It means we're very complicated. We have over 1,200 different subsidiaries, and everything that we want to do is just crazy, complicated, IP overlap, multiple 80 domains, hundreds of O365 tenants. You can just imagine what it's like. So about 90,000 people plus worldwide. My responsibility is for North America and UK as far as endpoint management is concerned. That encompasses about 15,000 endpoints in those 3 areas, so US, Canada, and UK. We're currently at about 13,500 under our management in a centralized tool, and we have another about 2,000 that are in 5 other Casper instances. And this is all spread across about 100 different organizations. So you can imagine some of the complexity that we ran into, some of the things that we had to deal with when doing this migration. The migration is, what we did was basically, we had a directive from the global CIO to get all of these devices, these 15,000, into one management tool, where prior to that they were in Casper, they were in LandRev, they were using Monkey, and at least 50% were unmanaged devices. So devices out in the field that had no management tool at all. Techs were using ARD, they were using SneakerNet, they were doing whatever they needed to do to get these machines, get software installed. They would image with all sorts of different tools, and we'll get into that a little bit. So you can kind of imagine what it was like, or what the environment was like. We're going to talk a little bit about some non-technical things, and we're going to talk about some technical things. So we'll give you a little bit of the, I'm going to give you a little bit of the what not to do, and then follow it up with this is what you should do. So what you shouldn't do is YOLO your deployment. You want to think about your deployment before you even start. From the time that you get told that you're going to be able to do Jamf, or that you get approval to install it, you want to start thinking about your deployment. Don't just throw up a server and say, you know what, we're fine. We'll just, hey, we got an extra Mac Mini sitting in the closet, or we got a little bit of space on our VM server. If you're going to do a large-scale deployment, you really need to start thinking about scale from day one. Think about what the tasks are to stand up your environment. What do you need, not just from infrastructure standpoint, but from on the Jamf side? Right? What are the settings that we need to flip? What are the bits we need to have set in Jamf Pro in order for us to have a successful deployment? And then think about your infrastructure. What are your infrastructure requirements? Are you going to cloud? Are you going to host your own? Are you going to host in your own cloud in AWS or Azure or Google? Think about, are you going to load balance? Are you going to use Memcache? Until it becomes a requirement from Jamf. Are you going to use Memcache for your load balance? Are you going to have multiple SQL servers for redundancy? Things like that. So think through what your infrastructure requirements are and where it will live, right? Like I said, is it going to be on-prem? Is it going to be in your own hosted cloud? Or are you going to go and do Jamf Cloud? And then be sure to include a dev, test, and prod environment in your plans. From the get-go, you should have dev, test, and prod. If you're being creative and trying stuff out that might break your environment, do it in dev. Do not do it in prod. Don't YOLO that in prod, because I can tell you that it will break in prod and it will cause you problems, because we had that happen in our prod early on, 1,200 clients in, and we had something that we just kind of pushed out. Didn't do any change, didn't do anything, just said, this is innocuous, it won't hurt anybody. It wound up DDoSing us, taking us down for about 2 days because of what we had done. So make sure you have a dev environment to play around in, and then have a test environment, and make sure that test environment closely matches your prod environment. from copying your database over to that test environment, to making sure that everything looks the same so that when you develop and test, you test your policies out and test, and then you can move those policies over to prod when you're ready to release to prod. The next thing you don't want to do is not have standards. You want to be able to have some standards. We didn't get standards built early on in the rollout because we had an impetus. We had management on our necks to get this pushed out and to get it done. And so we kind of had to do a lot of our standards on the fly. So when we came to our organizations and said, hey, we're going to migrate you into Jamf, and they're like, what's Jamf? Why are we doing it? What are the standards? What are we doing? And we kind of looked like deer in the headlights and couldn't give them a good answer in a lot of cases. So develop a standard build and stick to it. What's the base software that every single machine in your organization or your sub-orgs needs to have? Go to the lowest common denominator. Get as much as you can on that machine in that build, and then freeze it and stick to it, whatever that is. Develop a naming standard. For us, we spent a good 6 to 9 months just trying to iron out a naming standard for our computers. Again, like I said, we're over 100 organizations, sub-orgs that are in this central Jamf, and we had to be able to identify machines based on their computer name, right? So we had to have a way, because not only were we looking at this data, our service desk looks at the data, our security teams look at the data, and so they need to be able to identify those machines, security especially. When they get an alert in their Sophos console that such and such machine has malware, and we may not have that machine tied to a user in our ServiceNow CMDB because we were early on, or because that data might be stale or wrong because the computer has been redeployed to a new user, we needed a way to identify the machine, and so they can look at that computer name and based on that computer name know what business unit it's part of, and then what agency in the business unit it is associated with, and then we use part of the serial number as well. So develop that naming standard. Develop an application catalog. If you're ITIL certified or if you've been around an ITIL organization, application catalogs are huge. Develop that application catalog ahead of time, and then put all of the approved apps in self-service. And give that list to your service desk so that when a user calls and says, hey, I need XYZ app, the service desk can see, oh, that's approved. They can then install that app, and now they've got FCR. They've got first call resolution, which improves their percentages. It improves customer satisfaction. Get that app catalog design and stick to it. Develop how you want your JPS to look and stick to it, right? So your Jamf Pro server, how do you want your policies to look from a naming standard? How do you want your smart groups, your packages? Develop that naming standard as well. So the naming standard isn't just computer names. It also needs to be how do items look in your JPS? Because that will, it becomes easier to know what a policy does just by looking at it. Oh, this is for everyone and it's a self-service policy. Or this is for a specific organization, especially if you have sub-organizations like we do, and know exactly, oh, this is who that's for and this is what it does. And then document all of this and get it approved. Whoever your approving governing body is, have them approve it. If it's a global CIO or a regional CIO, get their stamp of approval on it, and then get it communicated out to your organizations so that they know what is coming. And this is something that we struggled with, right? We struggled with having authority that was pushed down to our organizations. So a lot of the organizations, when we came around, they were like, who are you and why do you think we want to do this? And we're like, well, the CIO said to do it. And they're like, yeah, well, we don't have any emails, we don't have anything. Make sure that you get that authority to be empowered by your senior leadership. Whether that senior leadership is the CIO, whether it's a regional director, whoever it is, make sure that you've got that authority, that you're empowered, and then make sure that authority is communicated down to the people, to not just to the directors, but to the managers and all the way down to the technicians so that they know when you come around who you are, what you're doing, and why you need to do it. And you don't get a lot of feedback from them. And then create advisory boards in your business units. or at the top level. Find the people in the organization that are Mac experts or Macadmins and get them involved. Get a few of them together and have a weekly, monthly, whatever it is, have a roundtable type meeting where you can bring ideas to them. Hey, we want to do this, or we have this request from this organization. How many of you would like to have that in your org, and how do we do it? And get their buy-in, get them to help you sell it down into the organizations under your control so that you have more success with this. I did all of the design and build myself. Now, I've got an infrastructure background, but I didn't have an AWS background, and that's where we're hosting our environment. And so we ran into performance issues in our AWS environment because I hadn't done anything at scale. Sure, I had infrastructure background, but my infrastructure background was for small shops, 100 to 200 people. I could stand up a file server like nobody's business and design a VLAN network with nobody's business. But when it comes to scale, a lot of things play. So make sure that you get your infrastructure experts involved early. Tell them what you want to do. Give them what the base requirements for Jamf Pro are. Let them know that it's a Tomcat memory-heavy process, and let them help you design it. Find a good developer and keep them. If you've got a developer in your organization, identify who that developer is, buy them pizza, buy them beer, do whatever you need to do to retain them and to keep them happy. Because not having a developer hurts. Developers help you design progress screens like what we saw from IBM. They help you develop reporting dashboards, especially if they've got DB experience or API experience. They can help you write scripts. They can do all sorts of things. And it's very important that you get a developer and hold on to them as best as you can. And again, reach out for assistance with your design and the build from your experts, from your infrastructure experts. If you've got app experts, ask them. Reach out to Jamf, get help from them. If you're hosting this in AWS or Azure, reach out to those experts, ask them for their assistance. And again, don't be afraid to ask for help from anyone. When you start scaling is much different than it is at 500. 500 users, 500 machines, you can do things that at 15,000 cause DDoS, cause performance issues, cause a lot of things. So don't be afraid to ask for help because it does scale differently. When you have your plan done, don't be afraid to change. I know I said stick to your plan as far as naming standard, things like that. Those are set in stone. But when you have an idea about something, don't be afraid to change. Don't be afraid to pivot when you come up against adversity. So be prepared to change your plan. Be flexible in what you're doing. Remember that there's always more than one way to do something, and ask the Macadmin community and listen. Ask the experts again and listen to what they say. We early on had the decision that we were going to deploy Apple hardware for our distribution points. The thought process around this was that we could manage those in Jamf. If we had a distribution point die, we could have someone run down to the Apple store, buy a Mac Mini, buy a laptop for that matter, if it was a small office, re-enroll that device in Jamf, and we could then reset up that distribution point through self-service. That was wonderful. It was a great idea until we got over to the UK and they said, that's great. Our infrastructure guys, our data center guys won't allow Mac hardware in the data center. And so we had to pivot and say, okay, Windows it is. And so we've gone with Windows SharePoints in agencies where we've needed to have distribution points. We don't deploy distribution points everywhere. We only deploy them in agencies or locations that are doing building, that are provisioning laptops or provisioning machines. But by going to Windows, we're able to use DFS so that we can take advantage of the DFS synchronization. We utilize batch scripts to do repo syncs using the AWS command line client and just scheduled tasks in agencies that don't have DFS or where we've only got one Windows share. But be flexible. You may have an idea in mind, but be ready to pivot from that idea when you hit adversity. We had an instance where we outsource our service desk, and we outsource some of the management of our Jamf Pro instance. And we had an instance last year where our outsource partner decided they wanted to create a smart group to determine how many different devices were out of compliance, didn't have patches on their machine. And they did this in the organization that had about 60 or 70 different suborgs. And each one of those suborgs was its own site within Jamf. And each one of those sites had a smart group that would capture the machines for that specific agency. Well, when you start chaining a whole bunch of nested smart groups together, you wind up having performance issues. So watch out for your smart group sprawl. That particular instance DDoSed us for about 4 hours until we figured out, we've got a rogue smart group that somebody created. We deleted the smart group, we lowered increased the frequency of check-in, and we were finally able to get back up after about 4 hours of downtime. So watch out for the complexity of your smart groups. Watch out for the number of smart groups, because remember, a smart group recalculates every time a machine checks in. Not just one machine, but any machine. So when you have machines checking in and you're at scale, you could possibly have hundreds of machines doing an inventory update. An inventory update, not a check-in, but you could have hundreds of machines at any one given time doing an inventory update. And when they're doing that inventory update, the smart groups are being recalculated on the back end on the master node. And so that can cause huge performance issues. Don't use a smart group when an advanced search will do. So we've had people where they've created a smart group to do reporting. They want to know how many instances of Office 2016 we have or something along those lines. They'll do it as a smart group, but that smart group is never going to be used to scope anything. It's never going to be for a policy, a config profile, or anything like that. If you're building something that you just need to know how many of something meet some criteria, and that is never going to be used as a smart group, use an advanced search. An advanced search only runs when you click view. So it's not recalculating each time a machine inventory updates, where a smart group does. And then try not to use fuzzy logic in your smart groups. Stay away from like. That's what killed that smart group I talked about earlier. That was one of the things that killed it. Not only was it nested, but they were also using like in that smart group. And a quick nerd note, regex. If you're a regex guru, 10.3 and above, you can now use regex in your smart groups. If you're not a guru of regex, there's plenty of websites out there that'll help you build a regex for your search. And so this is kind of what I'm talking about, right? So this would be a fuzzy search. We're looking for all operating systems 10.9 to 10.13, and we're using the like. Well, this is going to cause a lot of heartache or a lot of performance and heartburn on your server, because it's going to recalculate every time your machines update inventory. So a better way to do this one would be to use the new greater than, less than symbols in the smart group criteria. Or perhaps we've all done this one where we want to look for all the machines in a certain IP address range, right? We can't scope to net groups. We can't do a search based on network segments. So we do something like this, and sometimes we'll have 10 or 15 different criteria for this, where we're doing like this IP address. Well, instead of that, how about this regex, right? It's pretty complicated, but that regex does the exact same thing that the last slide did. And so look at using regex, look at using specific criteria in your smart groups and even in your advanced searches. But use that advanced search whenever you need to do reporting and not do a scopable group. And we had a problem also. We're bringing all these organizations under one management tool, and we needed a way to identify those devices. We would get a ticket in that said, deployed X software to this machine, only we didn't know which administrator's MacBook Pro it was that we were deploying to. So we had that problem. So come up with a way to identify devices, not just by machine name, not just by serial number, but maybe there's other criteria that you can use to identify your machines. And think about other information that you want to track on your machines. And then utilize P-lists and EAs to grab that data. So we determined that we wanted to keep track of the city the device was was being deployed in. We wanted to know the company or the agency that it was deployed in, and we had some other data that we wanted to keep. And so during our provisioning process, we utilized this little chunk of code. We used some pop-up dialog boxes during provisioning to gather this information from the technicians. So our machines are built by the technicians, they're not built by the end users. And so we grab this data and we can store this in a plist file that's hidden on the machine, and then later use an EA in Jamf to grab that data in, and now it becomes scopable data because you can scope off of any extension attribute. So something like this will grab that city and bring it into that EA. And so now I have an EA called city that I can see what city this machine was built for. So if it's built for New York and I need to scope to all the machines in an agency for New York, because it's a site and because I have city, I can now scope that easily. Remember, I said we had IP overlap. We're going through an IP rationalization project right now. We've got a ton of projects running, and one of them is, let's rationalize all our IP schemas so we don't have overlap. So I can't just use network segments all the time. You know, that'd be great if I could use a network segment and know that it's not going to have IP overlap and it's not going to be rationalized. And so this is how we'll use this one. And then this is what it looks like in the Jamf, right? In Jamf Pro, we can see that this is a machine that is scoped or is part of the city Dallas. We know what agency it is. We can look at asset tag if we're capturing that, what country it's a part of, what department. So just think about how you can do this and think outside the box. Just because Jamf Pro may not have some of these variables or some of these this information that you need, there's plenty of other ways to get that information onto a box, tattoo the box, and extend it with extend Jamf Pro with your extension attributes. If you think about a large organization, printers, right? Printers, you could have hundreds and hundreds of printers. Heard IBM yesterday say they've got 7,000 printers globally. Can you imagine having to use Jamf admin to capture 7,000 printers to put into Jamf? So we decided we didn't want to do that. We were going to use scripts to manage our printers, to add them. This gives us a lot more flexibility and a lot more control of drivers and the actual printers. And then we can use one script to install all the printers or multiple printers based on an agency or an organization. And when you have a change to a printer, right? So when a printer comes up on lease return, someone goes down to Best Buy and buys a printer, you don't have to recapture it. You can just change the lines in the script and you've changed the printer out. So it's a much quicker changeover when you have that type of thing. So this is the bit, the if-then statement that'll work to read the driver file. So if that driver file is not present, we can then kick off a policy using an ID number of the policy or a trigger to get that printer driver installed, because if you install a printer without the driver, the printer doesn't work, obviously. And then this is the bit of code that we would use to do the actual install of the printers in that script. So we use a case statement. I'll show you the policy in a minute that kicks off this case statement, but this gives us the ability to have all of our printers in this script, and then even group printers. You'll notice that down at the bottom there's that office case where we're actually installing printer 1 and printer 2 at once. So if you have an office or an agency that they say, hey, we just want everybody to have all the printers, Dallas, New York, Minneapolis, whatever, you can put that in there, and then in the policy within the JPS, right? So here's what it would look like for the single printer, right? It's no triggers, set to ongoing, and then under the scripts we would just add the name of the printer as the parameter. So printer 1, when the script gets kicked off, that parameter gets passed to the script, and then the script is able to run through that case statement, go, oh, here's printer 1, we'll execute this block of code for printer 1. And then for the office printer, same thing, no triggers, set to ongoing, and then we're able to set the name, office in this case, but it could be a city name, could be anything, and all of the printers in that block of code would get installed. I mentioned earlier that imaging was building a computer for our people. They used everything. They used Deploy Studio, Carbon Copy, Cloner. I'm sure they use NetBoot out there. And we all know NetBoot's dying. We all know imaging is dead. So we had to re-educate our people as to how to build computers using Jamf. We didn't want them using Jamf imaging. We didn't want to use NetBoot servers, not just because they were dying, but if you think about having multiple locations with multiple NetBoot servers, that then becomes a management nightmare in itself every time Apple spins hardware, or every time you get a forked build, you're having to rebuild your NetBoot set, and then you're having to update it on all of those NetBoot servers. We didn't want to have external USB drives for them to manage because we didn't know what the technical level of the technicians out in the field. As I mentioned, we outsourced service desks. We also outsourced our desk side support. And we didn't know what the technicians were going to be able to do. So we didn't want them having to update boot drives or anything like that. So imaging is dead. If you're not in DEP, get enrolled in DEP, or automated MDM enrollment, right, is the new catchphrase that Apple wants us using. If you're not there, get there. And if you can't get there, there are ways to do the provisioning without being DEP enrolled. It just utilizes self-service and an enrollment URL, basically. And then take time to build a pleasing process. We've all kind of fallen in love with the IBM method that was shown years ago and has been updated and continually. And there's plenty of tools out there, DEP Notify, Splash Buddy. Now IBM's released theirs open source. So take time to build a pleasing process. Even though it's the technicians doing the work, make it something that they don't question, is it done? Make sure they know what's going on so that they're not rebooting the machines in the middle of the provisioning process. Make it a pleasing process. And then think about who will be doing the provisioning. If it's your technicians, you might be able to not be quite as polished. But if it's an end user, if you're going to go to zero touch, where you're just handing a shrink wrap box to your end user, think through that process, what you want it to look like. This is where that developer comes in handy. If you can get a hold of a UX resource, someone that help you design the user experience, get a hold of them as well. And then use this opportunity during the provisioning process to gather that data. So if you remember, I mentioned that we gather a whole bunch of data and store it in a plist file. This is where you want to gather that data. Right now, we're using Cocoa Dialog with some pop-ups to gather data. Things like, because our naming standard is based on country and agency, if you're in an organization that is in multiple countries, we'll pop up and ask you, what country is this machine for? What agency is it for if you have multiple agencies that you're building for? And then we'll pop up that computer name to show them what the computer name is. We'll ask for city, department, email address, asset tag. So anything you can think of that you need to gather, go ahead and use either Cocoa Dialog, Pashua, the IBM process, whatever it is, use those different processes to grab that data and then store it on the machine and also update the Jamf Pro server. We use Jamf Recon to push a lot of this data up to the user tab. So like we utilize Okta LDAP for our user lookups to grab data onto the computer record. So we'll push the email address up to the username field in Jamf Pro, and now the next time that machine recons, as long as I've got LDAP query checked for recon, it should update that user tab by reading that data from Okta. And then I've got a quick video. This is about a minute long or so. Kind of shows the process. It's very sped up. Choosing the keyboard, the country of the keyboard, there's our remote management. We're going to put the local computer account on the machine. We do this so that there's a local admin on the machines for them to utilize. We'll enable location services, and you'll notice the pop-ups real fast, and then we go to our splash screen to let them know that we're actually installing software on the machine. Email address. And so this is something that happens right away. So once they get to the desktop, this pops up on a DEP enrolled machine. The difference for non-DEP is simply that when they get to the desktop, they have to run an enrollment URL to get the machine enrolled and then go into self-service, and that's when they would start to see these. So we utilize DEP Notify, provide some feedback, machine's restarted. We're going to log in. In this instance, we're actually doing some customization. We're going to customize the dock and customize the desktop background. Not our norm. We don't typically like to customize docks or desktops or finders. I'm a purist. I believe the user should be able to do what they want to do in the Finder, customize it to the way they want it to be. So a couple things to point out. One thing we also do in our scripts is we log everything. We try to log everything that we're doing, and then we will add those logs to the computer record in the JPS. So in any particular agency that we're doing a build for, we could have upwards of 3 scripts that are running: the naming script, a base provisioning script, and then a third script that adds any customization, any extra software that the agency needs. We'll upload all 3 of those at the end of the script runs. That way when someone says, hey, this didn't work, this didn't finish, we saw an error, we don't have to try to SSH into the box or ask the technician to send the right log. We can just go to the computer record in the JPS, download the log, open it up, and we'll be able to see that log. Last but not least are our updates, macOS updates. We wanted to make sure that our fleet was updated. We didn't want to just throw it out to the user. We didn't want to just all of a sudden reboot their computer, have a, hey, your computer's going to reboot in 5 minutes message pop up. But we needed to require those updates to be installed. So we worked with Jamf to develop a script. You can use the Jamf deferral map process. The only hang up that we found in the deferral that's built into Jamf is that once a policy has gone past the deferral date, you have to actually create a new policy to be able to use a new deferral date. And we just wanted to be able to keep one policy in Jamf and be able to just turn that policy on and off based on number of updates. So we have one policy. We developed this script with Jamf, and all it really does is use Jamf Helper to pop up some dialogues and keep track of how many times the user has deferred. So we let the user defer 3 times. We also have a self-service option, and we try to limit their in-the-face times, right? How much time we're spending in front of them. So with that Jamf Helper, we just pop up the screens. The very first screen will come up and tell them, hey, you've got an update that's required. You can defer it, or you can do the update right now. You have 3 times to do the deferral. When they get to that 3rd time, they'll get a different screen that says, hey, final warning, you've already deferred this 3 times. The next time this dialog comes up, you're going to have to run this update. And then the final one, which is really in their face. Hey, it's required. You've deferred it enough. Hit OK. We're going to start. So that's pretty much what we had to do for deferrals. We are reworking this a little bit. We're thinking about a different way to do it. Maybe provide a list of the updates that are going to be installed. Maybe a progress bar. We haven't decided yet. But yeah, so that's how we do updates. And some references for you. So like I said, this will all be up on my GitHub in that repository. I'll push that up later today. Macadmins Slack, if you're not part of it, get a part of it. There's a lot of great minds, a lot of people here at this conference. Everybody's very willing to help. DEP Notify is available in the marketplace. Zero to Productive is a webinar that Matt Phillips, one of the Jamf PSs, put on earlier this year, and it goes over a lot of these, a lot of the splash screens. DEP Notify is one of them, and so Splash Buddy. And then a link on how to use regexes in smart groups. And a final note, if you have a user group in your community near you, I highly recommend you join it. You go and attend. I'm from the Dallas area. We have a group down there that meets every other month, and we have some great conversations. It's not always about presentations or anything like that. A lot of times we just get around a conference room table, eat some pizza, and talk about what we're dealing with at that time. So it's a great way to meet fellow admins around the community. And we have admins that aren't even using Jamf. We have a Monkey admin, we have a FileWave admin that comes. So if you have one local, get to it and join it. Thanks.
Thanks. This is Steve is one of the most active members of the community and has been for forever. I've been with Jamf for 8.5 years, and Steve was around then so long that you referred to it as Casper, which means $1 in the jar. Just kidding. But so we've got Steve here. Thank you.
But I didn't refer to it as a JSS.
That's true. You did do really wonderfully at that. We got Steve here. Any questions that you guys have? Anything away from keyboard that you want to ask Steve? Because he's certainly shown he'll be around different times as well. You coming up for a question? Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, just had a question about when you have several thousand machines already in play and have to get them all enrolled, what was your experience like with technician-driven installs versus having the users try to do it themselves? Were you just sending out enrollment invites? Did you direct them to a website? How did you go about that?
We were fortunate that we did this before High Sierra, so we didn't have to deal with user-approved MDM. So we had a lot of the IT admins in those orgs use Apple Remote Desktop to push quick add packages. And the ones that we couldn't get, we would do quick add packages. Most of the organizations that we deal with do not have, didn't have local admins, or the users were not admins on their machines, which, to use a quick add package or to even use the enrollment URL, you have to be an admin to accept that MDM policy or to accept that quick add. So yeah, so we had to do ARD. We did some Jamf Recon, and just good old sneaker net. Yep.
Yeah, how's it going?
Good.
So I've just kind of a comment, maybe not so much of a question, but regarding the pushing updates on people and having that Jamf helper dialogue. One thing that I noticed that my users do all the time is they just drag that little window over to the corner of the screen.
Yep.
And then never click the button. So what I've resorted to, and I don't know if this helps you or not, but I actually just have just a launch daemon service. It runs in the background. So we do log, we track how many times they defer, et cetera. But when it comes time for D-Day, it's D-Day. I mean, we kill the Jamf helper process and we just force it upon them. But just for everyone involved, if you're using Jamf helper, it's awesome.
Yeah.
But if you never click the button, it never counts. It just will sit there and run forever.
Yeah, and that's the key point too, is that it will sit there and run forever, which means that the machine is not checking in and running other policies. Right. So you could have machines that all of a sudden are 7 days, 100 days of not checking in, and it's all because the user got smart, moved that Jamf helper off to their second screen, said they'll deal with it later, never rebooted their computer or whatever, and that's just running, and your Jamf process is stuck. Great feedback. Thank you.
Just to add to that too, though, you can get really sneaky with Jamf helper and a timeout plus a countdown. And if you set a default button, then whatever the default button is, it will actually trigger that button after the countdown. So your last one can have a countdown, and then at the end, it'll just run. So if they've ignored it long enough, just set a countdown and a timeout. And you should totally exactly do that. You should definitely not leave it up all the time, because yeah, we had the exact same problem with the solution that we built, because users were doing that. They were just putting it off to the side. It was like, so totally wanted to meet up with you later and show you something. And also tomorrow at 1:30, I have my session to show a new standardization around not just software updates, but all policy deployments. And so it has the built-in deferral and everything like that. So I didn't hear this, but are you currently using Jamf Cloud still? No, or
No,
AWS?
we're still AWS.
Okay. And what, how do you see the performance with CloudFront? Are you using CloudFront for most of your distribution?
We are. The distribution from AWS has been fine. We haven't had any issues with that performance-wise.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Thanks.
Thank you. And we are, that's part of our new development on that OS update. Those are a couple of things we need to figure out, right, is how do we force it? Because we also have to be careful. We oftentimes have a lot of people that are in front of clients doing presentations. And so we have to be mindful of that we're not, if PowerPoint's up and they're in presentation mode, or Keynote's up and they're in presentation mode, we cannot reboot. That's a quick way to lose my job, is if I rebooted someone's machine while they're in front of new business doing a new biz pitch.
Yeah, so with the local admin, what do you guys do for password rotation? Do you have any standards with that?
We don't. The agencies each have their own local admin, so it's not, yes, it's one account with the same password on multiples. We do spin them when people leave, but there is not there's no policy set yet for 90-day rotation or anything like that. Sure. That is something we're looking at. Security doesn't want us to have a single admin account on all the devices. So we've recently implemented the Make Me Admin script from Jamf, and we are going to look at stripping admin rights from those local admin accounts.
Oh, okay. Where you like in the build, you just like blow it away once it's done, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So what we would do with a DEP instance would be once they've got it set up, we'd probably set a launch daemon that then would rip that account out.
Sure.
You have to be mindful of secure token though. So it may not be that we rip the whole account out. We just rip it out of the admin group. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Steve, thank you so much for both this talk and all the stuff you've done in the community. Thanks for being here.